This episode is sponsored by Kendo UI. Kendo UI allows you to build better apps faster. They have a comprehensive library ranging from data grids and charts to buttons and sliders. Plus, you can use their components as plain JavaScript as well as in Angular, React, and Vue. They have a large collection of customizable popular themes like Bootstrap and Material. Go check them out at javascriptjabber.com/KendoUI. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel we have Chris Ferdinandi.
Hey everyone, how's it going?
Joe Eames.
Hey everybody.
Aimee Knight.
Hey from Nashville.
I'm Charles Max Wood from DevChat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that is Justin Meyer. Justin, do you want to say hi?
Hello, I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, we had you on episode 202, I think, to talk about CanJS.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. That was a great time. Plus, I like the palindrome numbers.
Yeah. I better check the episode number on this one, see if we can
replicate it.
So yeah, apparently a lot's changed. First of all, though, do you want to just remind everybody who you are?
Sure. I'm one of the founders and former CEOs of Bitovi, a JavaScript consulting company started like 10 years ago. I was a contributor to JavaScript MVC, had a few notable contributions to jQuery, and then authored CanJS and then StealJS and DoneJS. Contributed also to a bunch of little side projects that we've used over the years.
Right. And CanJS, if I remember right, and DoneJS were all part of JavaScript MVC or kind of came out of that project?
Yes, they kind of spawned forth from that project. So that was a big kind of monolith project, and then the little bits got pulled out so they could be used independently.
Awesome. Do you want to just give us then a brief introduction to what CanJS is?
Sure. I mean, it's a JavaScript framework, very similar. I think probably most similar to Vue. It adds the big thing it would add compared to Vue is a very strong model layer. It could do things like real time very well, and that got a big enhancement in CanJS 5.0. So like automatic list management is the big kind of tricky thing, and I think possibly unique that it does, at least the way that it works. But it's a JavaScript framework.
So when did CanJS originally release?
Oh, the first one probably 2012 or 2013, maybe.
Okay. And what is the current CanJS like in comparison to that version? Are we talking like, version 10 versus version 1, or are we talking Angular versus AngularJS?
So it's kind of interesting. Compatibility is really that important to us. So although CanJS 5 is quite different from like CanJS I, a lot of the same tools are still available. I don't know if we're unique in this, but we break every single part of the framework is actually maintained in its own repository. So it has over 80 different repositories with pretty much like every individual API that composes to build like something not the order of like a Vue or React in terms of functionality. But that allows us to release something that was in CanJS 1.0, can map, or like this called can control, which is more basically like makes jQuery widgets. So like that was kind of CanJS 1.0, is it had observables, and you'd use it in some templates, and you'd use it to make jQuery widgets. It's kind of like Backbone or mixed with Knockout. So all that stuff is still available, and you can pull those repos in. It's not part of what we call our core anymore. It's not quite like it's very different like Angular is, but all those things still work, and they are like there's not as much cost to using them if you had that old legacy code, because all of the low-level helpers and utilities, those are all in a layer themselves that and individual repos. So it's like if you loaded can control, the old jQuery widget thing, and now you're using something that builds custom elements called can component, they have a lot of overlap in terms of the functionality that you're using. So you don't have a huge cost to like having some old legacy code still do its thing while you build something new in 5.0.
Huh. Okay. So I'm kind of curious here. What is it like? We've got definitely a weird confluence going on right now. Angular, React, and Vue are sort of dominating what everybody is sort of talking about. So, one, I think I got kind of like a two-part question here. One, where is the core strength of CanJS as far as like its user base and usage, and who's like using it? And two, what's it like to be the CanJS when everybody's talking about React, Angular, and Vue?
Yeah, so we've we've dealt with this problem for 10 years as like a consultancy built around our open source. That 10 years ago, JavaScript MVC was never as popular as Backbone, never as popular as Cappuccino and GWT and things like that. So emotionally, it's not great. I wish I wish it was more popular, but our responsibility is to our user base and keeping them happy. So store.apple is built in CanJS. So there's been big sites that use it. Chase uses it, I think, for its like main, once you're kind of buying things in Chase. So we've had big companies use it. There's a reason why the turtle is on its like homepage, because our goal is just like consistently grow, evolve the platform, retain current users. Hopefully someday we'll have the breakout in terms of like reasons for, in terms of popularity. But I think that we have shifted strategies a little bit, and we'll see if that pays off. But, and then to your second question is why, what was the big differentiator? I think that historic longevity is one, right? That it is a framework that's going to keep. It isn't. It doesn't bend to the whims of the community as much. That's partly why it's still around for so long, despite never being popular. If you had picked Backbone, 6 years ago, you wouldn't be left being able to migrate your application to new ways of development. The second thing is, like I talked about, the model layer is pretty unique and extremely is a big strength of what it can do. And I think the final thing that we're starting to do with CanJS 4.0 is we have this idea that we're going to make object-oriented programming cool again. So CanJS is able to figure out, in terms of like computes and things like that, what is related to what in your application, and in terms of like two-way bindings, one-way bindings. It's able to see how a value flows through all of this stateful mechanics that I'm not sure other frameworks really have. And because of that, we've begun working on developer tools. Some of them are the pieces of it are already starting to be put in place. Like you can pick a variable, then you can just see how every element in the page responds to it, is mutated by it, or is changed by it. I think that that's one thing that we are going to be very strong at in the future, is that helping people understand their application, but get the benefits of object-oriented development, but still be able to understand it, which is in some ways the big problem that people are trying to address with immutable state, is that you don't know who's changing it, why it's changing. Through good developer tools, I think we're going to be able to help solve that problem.
Okay. You mentioned like two things I want to jump in on. So let's start with the first one. You mentioned like making OO cool again. We're definitely seeing, again, if you're talking about the Silicon Valley bubble of where everybody's talking to themselves on Twitter, which apparently dictates the entire rest of the the industry, right? That's how it works. I know that Chris is a big believer in letting Silicon Valley dictate and everything that we do, right?
I would kind of like to chime in here and say something too. So I'm a big proponent in like everything has trade-offs, and I would never reach for something because it was quote unquote cool. I would reach for something because it was the right tool for the job. And unfortunately, like, I don't know, I've never seen like full in functional be super beneficial, and I've never seen like full in object oriented be beneficial. So I would be really hesitant to say like I'm trying to like make something cool. I would just be like, trying to make the things that object oriented is good at super accessible in the framework.
Okay, yeah,
that's many responses to that statement.
That's a great like marketing angle to take. The way that to kind of put more nuance to what we're trying to do, we're trying to remove some of the worst parts of object-oriented programming. What is
okay? That sounds a lot better.
Yeah.
Now I'm intrigued. Say more.
Yes.
So what I mean is object-oriented programming. The worst parts of it is you have this mutable state. And you have no idea why something might change.
And like the deep inheritance structure, that is kind of an anti-pattern, but people tend to do it anyways.
Yeah, I would, for at least in CanJS, I don't see that actually occurring too often.
Maybe in Can, but any developer will do anything.
Well, they will. No, undeniably they will. But that's not like... Deep inheritance is like I don't know. It's definitely a problem, and it kind of can create this,
Like, I'd rather use composition.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, and you should. But that isn't... So one thing I kind of talked about in my Google Doc or whatever, we have changed strategies a lot, and I think it's actually helped CanJS grow. So we were really pretty much stagnant after the 3.0 release, and the 4.0 release, we finally saw our numbers grow, like 60% since January. And I think a big part of that is we are doing a lot of user studies now. We actually, when we make a new release, we're about to do documentation. I run meetups and things like that. And we'll actually pay people to review the code to try to program something small with it and see if they're successful. And that being said, inheritance schemes aren't something that people are going to encounter. Like if you're looking at it from kind of how I am a little bit, like we're trying to make a product now that people are going to like and enjoy. Inheritance schemes is something that like people find months down the road, and then they kind of blame themselves for in terms of frustration. When you're designing a framework, the immediacy of like, I just built this thing, or I'm rolling onto this new CanJS project and I have no idea how it works. And like, why is this, when someone types in here, why is all of this stuff happening? I have no idea. That's something that people will blame on the framework. So I'm just looking at it like in terms of that, why the inheritance stuff, yeah, that's definitely a problem, but it's not the problem that people come back to me as a framework author.
That makes more sense. Okay.
This is terrible. So that's why we're focusing so much on like the mutable state aspect and trying to give people tools to be able to understand it.
Awesome. That makes sense. Then that's good. That's valuable.
Cool.
As long as I can use my functional stuff, I like to.
Yes, there's no problem.
All right, so I would like to dig in deeper. I actually would like to dig in deeper into state management.
Yeah,
everybody's doing Flux, right? So talk about that some more, and with CanJS.
Yeah. So I like the reducer patterns and things like that a lot. It depends on which kind of user you are talking to, and a part of this is now, if you had talked to me like a year ago after CanJS 3, where CanJS and like DoneJS and kind of Bitovi in general was, the way I approached open source was mostly just, hey, I'm going to do what I think is cool and awesome, and I'm going to build those things. I really like stream-based programming and things like that. But the problem that I see with those things and the proposals that I've written to bring that into CanJS is when I talk to new, users just off the street, kind of like people who are getting into programming, people who just graduated from boot camp, things like that. There's a reason why we're kind of double down on object-oriented programming. It's just because it's in some ways that universal that everybody understands. And we're in some ways taking a gamble that and in some ways Vue has shown that this can be true, is that to make something that's usable by everybody is the most important thing you can do as a framework. In some ways, there's a lot of divisions inside Bitovi and just people who disagree with me about this, and that I've come to kind of this realization that if you look at like React statistics, who uses what state management, it's like more than 50% or about 50% of people don't use any state management with React. So really React is what drives React's success is it's got the best, view layer there is in terms of like how easy it is to understand. So that drove all the interest in React and, its consumption. And then you get things like Flux for in some ways, maybe the upper echelon of programmers. So I'm trying to hold myself back from things like that to make something a core inside CanJS, which is in a lot of ways its observable layer that is extremely simple and easy to use for everybody. And then then maybe there's ways of, because we've added kind of low level reducers and streaming things into CanJS, more object-oriented approach, those can become more popular for an upper echelon that appreciates them. But I'm, in some ways, just trying to avoid that from a design perspective. I don't know if that makes it it's kind of like a non-answer, but that's how I'm trying to focus our energies.
Okay.
You're skeptical. That's totally okay. But.
No, it's totally fine. I think it's personally very interesting to see that there are people that are not just like, oh my gosh, Dan Abramov said this, we all have to jump on this bandwagon. Not that Dan Abramov is not a very smart person. He is a very smart person.
Yeah, so that's how I used to think. And I don't think the last coolest thing I've done is I made this we made this H2 incremental server-side rendering for DoneJS. Essentially, it server-side renders your page, but as your page is building itself, it's actually sending H2 diffs out from your server-side rendering that are assembled on the front end and built. And it totally improves front-end performance. I mean, it's radically better. And I think it's, it can take a site that maybe is rendering in front-end rendering in 500 milliseconds, and you'll start seeing something come out at 100 milliseconds. Loads better. It's going to be part of DoneJS 3. It's going to be amazing. No one will care, right? Like some upper echelon people might say, "Oh, that's really cool," and maybe an Amazon or Google will use the technique, and that'll be awesome. But it will not drive any users to DoneJS because people just want to solve their problem. Most people don't care about performance that much. I meet a lot of fresh developers now. And when I say there are people who still make decisions at companies, but they haven't been in the game for for 10 years. I think that focusing on them is what we're attempting to do. And at least in the last 9 months, it's had results.
So Justin, I am trying to think of the best way to frame this, but so I have this belief that just as a community, we tend to turn to frameworks and tools way too much. And I'm not necessarily saying you disagree with that, but obviously you have a framework that you manage and maintain. So from your perspective, when does it make sense to turn to a tool like this? And when would someone be better off just kind of working with, some of the native JavaScript methods or browser APIs, things like that?
Yeah, I think it depends how complex your app is and under what constraints does it need to run in terms of browser support and your ability to work through those problems. I think that's kind of a generic. To me, it really comes down the reason to use a framework over no framework is the state management aspects of frameworks. That they can, something has changed, and they will propagate that change through a whole bunch of different layers of your application, transparent to you. And that I don't think you can really live. I can't live without. Unless it's a very small, I'm just working on this one little, area that doesn't touch much of anything else, then that's totally fine.
Okay. And that's fair. And I've certainly heard that before. And I had a bit of a debate with Chris Coyer about kind of similar type perspective too. So one of the things I've found is that a lot of times these frameworks, it looks like CanJS is a pretty similar thing. Like, it doesn't just come with state management. There's a whole bunch of other stuff layered into, so templating and helper functions and all sorts of other fun stuff, which I know as developers we often love because they make it easier and faster to do certain things. But in particular, because you just mentioned performance, and it's something I care deeply about too. At what point does the weight of the extra tooling become counterproductive to the end user experience? It's really easy to be like, an extra 30 kilobytes is inconsequential. It's a couple of JPEGs. But, depending on who's consuming your site and what their data plans look like and the amount of bandwidth they have access to and where they're based in the world, like that can be a really significant difference. It can also mean the difference between having a site that loads and one that just displays an empty white screen. Where do you kind of draw that line? How do you think about this sort of thing?
So one, I would check out the incremental server-side rendering stuff that we're doing when that lands, because that
that sounds awesome. Really excited about that.
A lot of this stuff, but I mean, it depends. I sometimes think that that's like I don't know what the parallel. That's like a rich developer problem, where like you have enough you have enough users and things like that you can start making those fine-tuned adjustments for your web application. I think that generally speaking, people should do whatever's going to deliver the product first and then worry about performance later. We work with a number of startups, and although I do think our stuff is geared to just come with performance by default, because as long as you're doing progressively loading your JavaScript bundles and things like that, that can dramatically change the weight and the feel of your, you got to load your 30, 50 kilobyte JavaScript framework, but then your login page is just a little tiny bit. And that's all you load. And then everything else you kind of start background loading, and you can make it a lot better. I think performance is absolutely something people should focus on. It's just, it's when it makes sense from a business case. And that depends a lot where you're working.
So playing devil's advocate here, though, I 100% agree about premature optimization of code. I've seen people go way down yak shaving territory before they have functional code. But isn't there potentially some danger in kind of suggesting that you focus on performance when it becomes a business issue? It's a little bit like saying, well, we'll tackle accessibility later. And then you never get around to it. And, it may not be, what am I trying to say? As developers, we often work on these really fancy machines with really great, the latest browser and excellent, data connections. And so for us, it's never a problem, but it could potentially be for our users. And I don't know if maybe there's just a lack of empathy or awareness among developers, but I don't know. I worry a little bit that kind of advice has the potential to. That's the kind of thing that's gotten us to where we are today, where we're loading. The average web page is 5-6 megabytes per page load now, and just loaded with a whole bunch of junk that you maybe don't need.
Well, I would say then to me the arrow through the hole or whatever analogy you want to use is I do progressive loading and bundles, because then no matter what, you can build and definitely do use modules, because then you can build your homepage with EXTJS Angular weird monstrosity that's 500K to load. But then when you get to the point where people are actually using your product and it's out, and you're like, oh, we want to address, we want to make it faster. You can just just use native HTML and native DOM methods and just build that one widget or whatever it is as easy and fast to load it as possible.
Doesn't it feel a little bit, though, where making a more complicated front-end engineering process and then engineering even greater complexity to deal with the complexity that we created in the first place to an extent, where now we need to do things like bundlers and module loaders to address the fact that we've added so much stuff as part of this bigger, and maybe that's just kind of the cost of doing business with these more complex front-end apps that we have, where, we're doing things that are, we're not just loading static documents on a page anymore. But I'm constantly, and I think this is now that I'm bald and graying and getting old, I feel like a crotchety old man yelling at clouds sometimes. Like, it just feels like we're making this whole thing more complicated than it needs to be.
So I think to me, a little bit depends on where you're sitting too, because then I think it's more on the developers to push, like that a lot of times comes down to the design, right? Like if your design lends itself to, most of your page is just links and things like that, and there's no fancy widgets or anything like that, then, the developers can choose a path for that makes sense. But once you start having a lot of complex states, you don't want to manually write your HTML all over the place and have to update it. I don't blame developers for wanting to pull in frameworks to solve their problem and go home early.
No, that's fair. And admittedly, I'm potentially a little overly dogmatic about this stuff. Because you're someone who cares about performance, do you feel like there's maybe a responsibility or an onus on people who maintain frameworks to build things into the product that maybe, I don't want to say enforce, maybe that's too strong of a word, but encourage better practices? And if so, is CanJS doing anything like that? Because I admittedly haven't worked with it much.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open source Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code DevChat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code DevChat at Sentry.io.
Well, Steel gives the warning, I think it does now, like that Webpack does, that your build is big, that kind of thing. In terms of performance, I don't think that, generally speaking, the runtime performance of CanJS is going to be the critical performance path for anybody, right? DoneJS is a better question. Does DoneJS do that? And arguably it should do more than what Steel might build in. But is there a responsibility? That's we go to usability. Usability is the one that I feel like is more, it's in some ways the arguments line up better there for what I think you're generally advocating is, do developers have responsibility to be kind of put their foot down and say, we really need usability. And this is the oldest question. This is what's the, Black Panther and stuff like that are it's always the same, maybe not Black Panther, but where do you draw the line in terms of you need to achieve some, it's like politicians, right? You need to achieve some success to be able to you need to get elected to be able to fight the battles that you really want to win. So do you bend in the beginning to achieve the success where you can do, what you believe is right? And I guess the pragmatist in me says, yes, do that. You should hold yourself to a high standard, but you need someone using your product or it doesn't matter. And I guess from us, because we do consulting and we get startups and they, it's so, it's people who it's maybe they don't have a huge amount of money and just you got to get stuff done and in. I think the real responsibility shouldn't necessarily be put on an individual developer. In some ways, it like should be the framework authors to really stress that and make that stuff easy. And in some ways, I guess I'm going to flip this back into you guys, and you're doing a good job, which, and girls, is that you should demand like, oh, frameworks have to have an accessibility or a performance story and those kind of things. Like that's what it takes to that's what we want to write about. That's what we want to talk about, which good job turning this conversation into that. That's kind of how you do it, is you make the narrative about this is an important feature for frameworks, because they'll build it in if it becomes something like users are demanding or they feel enough pressure. They'll build it in so it's easy to do. And then when it's easy enough to do, like it just gets flipped on, it becomes part of the process.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fair. I'm thinking about how like React caught a lot of flack for this, and now they have an accessibility guide on their website, for example. I will shut up about this now because I could dominate the whole episode. So I'll let someone else jump in now.
I guess I kind of have a question. So you said that you run a consultancy. When do you recommend using Can, and when do you recommend using something else, or do you always recommend using Can?
Well, for us, it's definitely, I always recommend using CanJS because part of our key differentiator in terms of consultancy is that we have access to all of the core contributors for the framework who can lift mountains and just make things happen. I don't know how, and solve problems that can be sometimes tricky. I mean, I don't know if you found yourself digging through your framework of choice's code and be like, what's going on here? Why isn't my stuff working? If you ever find yourself doing that, like that's not as much of a problem because there's people that they can immediately call and or like our people can talk to get answers for that. So
what do the people that you build out for, what do they do when their contract is over? Because I actually have worked on an application that is a very old version of Can, and it's been extremely difficult to troubleshoot problems just because, the community isn't as large and things like that.
Are you on Gitter?
I'm not.
Like we're really active on Gitter. Like I think that's one thing is we also are, we have people whose full-time job it is to like help other people on Gitter, which those people should definitely reach out to us. Gitter. We also provide like near at cost or at cost upgrades. So at our cost, like have our developers do it. So that helps keep people moving to the latest code. We will promote in terms of if they're looking for people to do replacement. We promote whatever job posting that they post to help them find somebody. So we try as hard as possible to have people who've picked our technology have a good experience and help them any way we can.
Okay, that's helpful actually.
So yeah, if they're doing it, let them know that we're out there. We're always looking to help.
Then another question. So a lot of these frameworks kind of have like established testing patterns, just like we have like the Create React app, you get stuff out of the box with that. Angular has its own thing. What do you guys do? So
DoneJS is that. So DoneJS comes with like integrated server-side rendering, testing, continuous integration. You can deploy it to Heroku. It is like just the full kitchen sink.
So is there like a CLI if I want to do something like that?
That's what DoneJS is. Yeah. You just DoneJS add app and then it generates the whole thing for you.
Okay.
So can we return a little bit to just CanJS and its place in the market? Mm-hmm. Do you think that the environment right now for CanJS is better or worse than it was back in 2012? As far as, is there more space for CanJS as a viable solution, or is there less space in today's environment?
It's probably worse, right? You have these huge companies now that can throw lots of money at their individual platforms. But for us, I think we're also different than we were a year ago, at least. I really do think that the methodology that we're using for the last year of focusing on our users, we do a survey every 6 weeks to collect all their feedback on which features we should add. We do those things that people vote for, has really helped turn the tide. In some ways, a lot of ways, again, Vue has shown that building a framework that people can understand, it will be successful. And that's what we've begun to do by listening to our users. So it's worse, but I think we're smarter. At least I hope we are. That remains to be seen.
What about for frameworks in general, alternative frameworks that aren't, one of the big 3 or big 5 or whatever the big number happens to be at this month? Is the space getting better? Is it getting more welcoming? Is it getting less welcoming?
I think it depends on what you are, like what kind of framework you are in some ways. I think the problem is like frameworks have consolidated a lot in terms of their feature set and what they are. So it's very hard to compete if you are the exact same thing as, if you're another version of JSX or something like that. It's just going to be hard to do that. Of course, I mean, that's at any time, but now because the market there's so many ideas, it's just getting harder and harder. But I think any industry can be kind of ripe for innovation and change. I would never. To me, the big question is like, what helps people break through? What do you think helps technology or framework break through to like, it gains wide adoption and mass appeal? I know I have my answer. I'm curious about. I feel like I've been talking so much. I have to ask you guys first something.
Well, I don't know if it's more or less welcoming, but I can say for myself that I appreciate the richness of the field as it exists right now. There's certainly a couple that are definitely not in high usage that I think are very interesting. For the two that I'm thinking of specifically is Svelte and Elm. I think that both of those are very useful to learn, whether or not you might use them on a production product or project. Does that make sense?
They're useful to learn whether we got Elm for sure. I don't have as much experience with Svelte.
Svelte's interesting because it compiles down to just JavaScript. There's no framework. So when you download, there's no framework downloaded, no overhead. So it's kind of another cool, interesting idea. And the other one, the Rails one, Chuck, what's the name? I always blank on this name because their name is not super exciting.
Well, we'll just give your brain a little bit of a stimulus, maybe a little stimulus package for you.
Stimulus, right? Like it doesn't jump out the way like Svelte does, or it doesn't stick in my brain. Anyway, Stimulus is another interesting one. It's sort of like half of a framework.
Yeah, it's kind of tongue in cheek as a stimulus package for your front end.
Yeah, to me, I think it's people just saying that they like it. I think it spreads by word of mouth. And if you get something that people can use, and that's why I feel like I've just totally changed. I used to think, it's technology. It's like this cool feature about Svelte. The feature might be important to get maybe a few people talking about it, but all that really matters is, can you deliver? Can you produce something? Is it easy to do? And then will you say, I like this. I had a good experience with it. That at the end of the day, the usability matters more than features, I think is my operating theory. Cool.
I like that operating theory.
Yeah, we'll see how it turns out. We'll have this conversation again in like another year and a half, and then I will either be right or wrong, living on the street, or I will be on top of the JavaScript world.
I'm on top of the world. Hey.
Yeah. It'll be me and John Resig.
Have we talked about like the future of CanJS and where it's going from here? I mean, this is kind of about the future, right? But like long-term future, have we talked about that yet?
Yeah, I mean, long-term future is it's because of now that this operating theory is really, it's really just trying to connect to our user base, finding what makes them happy, and delivering on that. We still put proposals out there. I mean, I think to me, if I had my way, which I don't anymore. And that's actually that's the big difference, but I do try to guide it. I think JSX is the best templating language there is. It's a great way of articulating views. I really, really like it. We've already started to build integrations between JSX. There's it's called Ylem, YLEM. That is a CanJS's observable core mixed with React. I like that, but React doesn't produce custom elements, and that's something CanJS does. And I really, really like custom elements. And to me, I think the biggest remaining problem with custom elements is there's no good, at least I've not seen a solution, if you all have, a solution for how to do bindings between custom elements of like different frameworks and things like that. Right? It's very hard to say, I want to pass this object to this custom element declaratively through a view. And then like do two-way bindings and things like that. So I think that's really the problem that we want to solve. I think that there's a space there between like React and Vue, which is kind of solve those problems really nicely. I would really like to be in that space. So that to me is the future of CanJS. And then I am a big believer in like the reducer kind of state mechanics. And I've put out proposals that continually are never voted on by the community to create one of those. But no one seems to like them. So I will only do one if the community makes it at least high enough where I'm like, yes, this is the right thing. Let's build that. So that to me is the kind of the future of the stack. I do hope the DoneJS stuff, the incremental server-side rendering, is picked up in a big way. It is crazy that is even possible. Like I don't want to. I do want to communicate this because it's just so freaking cool. Just to say it again, we will server-side render. It can work with React or Angular or whatever. And like your page normally builds up. As it's building up, we're doing a mutation observer in the server and sending patches out to the client. The client, we are doing initial HTML kind of scrape. We send that out so the user can start seeing their initial HTML, if there's any script tags, things like that. But we also can detect any images or things like that, and we will H2 push those out, and we'll push out any JavaScript. And then we also push out that stream with H2. And then in the client, it just basically makes a streaming ND-JSON fetch request for the so what the server's pushing out, and it starts in an iframe. It starts applying all of those patches, so you see the page building, which works really well if you've got a streaming service layer too, because then you can like see your products come in as they're streamed from the server. And then we're seeing in JavaScript is building itself. Like JavaScript is finally downloading. Well, it's actually being pushed out. And it's becoming alive, your framework's becoming alive, and it's starting to build the page. And once the building of the page surpasses what the server-side rendering has pushed out, the page reattaches, and then your application runs from there. So in terms of performance on slow internets, it is like, we did we've got numbers on this stuff, but it's like, if you've got like we made a little artificially big, like 500K JavaScript asset that had a load and then before your page could be drawn. But it's something like 10, 15 seconds faster to start seeing something in a incrementally server-side rendered page than your standard single page application that has to like go back and download the JavaScript and then go back and start downloading your making AJAX requests to get your data. So that I hope that's if my theory is wrong, that actually people do care about cool technology, that's going to be in some ways the big technology that differentiates us, even though it can work with React and all those other frameworks, but that'll be the kind of the framework's feather in its cap. So I'm a big fan of that.
All right. Well, I think it's about time for us to do picks. Is your job search stuck? Maybe you're not getting any interviews with employers, or maybe you are, but no job offers. Or you may be new and not even know where to start. This is Charles Max Wood, and I'm releasing a new course and ebook on how to find a job as a software developer. The course walks you through the process of finding the types of companies you want to work for, getting their attention, and putting your best foot forward as the candidate they want. I've coached dozens of developers in looking for jobs and have been able to help several people find jobs within 2 weeks to 2 months. So whether you're new to development, can't find a great job that fits what you want, or are looking for remote work from an area without a strong tech community, I can help. Go to getacoderjob.com and sign up today. Aimee, do you want to start us off with picks?
Yep, I have two, and I apologize again because I'm pretty sure I duplicated them last week as I looked back through our channel and noticed. But my picks for this week, so everybody knows I'm a huge fan of exercise. So yet again, another study on how taking a walk makes you more creative, which makes you a better problem solver. So that's the first one. And then second one, I'm sure you can find this information in various places all over the internet, but this is a super catchy URL called and I am so don't cuss, but it's part of the URL, so I have to say it. So it's Git, pretty funny. So if you have anybody who's like super frustrated with Git, probably send them this and hopefully they will like it. It's pretty good too. It's solid content. So that's it for me.
Awesome. Chris, what are your picks?
Hey, so I have three this week. First up is, and I'm sure this has been brought up on the show before, but Polyfill.io. It is FT or Financial Times Polyfill service, but they've generously open sourced it and CDN'd it so anybody can use it. Super, super cool. You just drop a link to it on your site and it will detect the browser your users are using and automatically serve up a gzipped and minified set of polyfills custom made for their browser, which makes it way easier to just write with the latest JavaScript stuff and not have to think about it much. So in the latest Chrome, you get back nothing. And I think it polyfills all the way back to IE7. You get something that's around like 15 kilobytes after gzipping, which is pretty crazy. So I use that on pretty much everything these days. The second is this really awesome plugin called DoneJS from a friend of mine, Sarah Dayan, also known as Front Stuff. It's this super useful plugin for working with different currencies, doing various maths on them, doing comparisons, converting into different formats, just super, super handy. And yeah, highly recommend. And then my last one, just because I don't think I mentioned this when I actually came on the show to talk about vanilla JavaScript stuff last time, but I have put together a collection of resources for folks who are kind of trying to do more vanilla JS-y stuff. So if you go to vanillajstoolkit.com, I have a whole bunch of code snippets, helper functions, boilerplates, recommended plugins, and so on. So feel free to check that out.
Can you put those into a library?
Yeah, so everything that I have there is MIT licensed. So if you wanted to kind of steal and repurpose, you can. I am very much of the a la carte philosophy of web development. So I kind of prefer to just cherry pick stuff as needed for projects rather than kitchen sink it. But someone certainly could.
Well, I was implying that it would no longer be vanilla JS if you made a
That is fair. It's kind of a weird, like when is something not vanilla JavaScript? Like React is written with vanilla JS. Anyways, I could soapbox, but I won't.
All right, Joe, what are your picks?
All right, so I got two picks. First, there's a YouTube channel called Pitch Meeting. If you're at all into movies, and you would highly enjoy this. It's super clever, very entertaining. And the other one is the movie Solo. It probably will have just come out on DVD and Blu-ray and streaming by the time this releases, or shortly after that. If you haven't seen it, it's really a great movie. It's a good job. It's a good addition to the Star Wars stable. So if you haven't checked it out, do yourself a favor, go check it out. Those are my picks.
I've got a couple of picks here, and then we'll let Justin give us some picks. So the first one that I have is I've been playing with a new framework. It's a back-end framework. So yeah, not necessarily 100% applicable to JavaScript, but it's highly concurrent. It's got a whole bunch of stuff going for it. It is rather new by comparison to some of the other things that I've used, like Ruby on Rails. It's Phoenix, and it's written in Elixir. And I've really been enjoying that. We have an Elixir show on devchat.tv, so you can go check that out. Yeah, that's been terrific. And two other things that I'm going to pick. So I listen to programs on Audible, and I say programs because not everything I listen to on Audible is a book. And so the two things that I've listened to lately that I've really enjoyed, one of them is a book, and it's called The Queen's Poisoner by Jeff Wheeler. It's a fantasy novel. It was a terrific story. The narrator's pretty good. Not the best narrator that's been out there, but pretty good. And then the other one that I listen to is A View from the Top by Zig Ziglar. And it's his audio program, not his book. He has a book by the same title. So, anyway, it's a terrific, he just sits down and records stuff, and they kind of mix in some of his, live seminar recordings. And anyway, really great stuff. So if you're looking for some, growth, life advice kind of thing, then Zig Ziglar is one of my favorites. And in fact, I've actually listened to everything Audible has by him except for 2 books, and I'm getting to one of those next. So anyway, Justin, what are your picks?
So my first pick is, I don't know if it's technically a pick, but I was at the Browser Contributor Days event, watched that stream, and one of the first chats was someone was implicitly or more than implicitly saying that Chrome might kill H2 push. If there are any Chrome developer engineers who are hearing this, please do not kill H2 push. I've spent a lot of time with it. I love it. It is great. So please keep that. And watch the Browser Contributor Days event on YouTube. It was really interesting to see what the Chrome developer team is working on, get their perspective on things. It's very helpful to know that kind of stuff if you are planning for the long term of browser support and things like that. My second pick is your episode with Tom Dale. I really like that one. I always love when you guys have framework authors on it. The most important thing for me in that takeaway was that he said he wore a suit when he spoke at a conference. And I just wanted to say that I did that at a jQuery conference like 8 years ago, and it did not go over well. So I want to say I'm very happy that the JavaScript community now can understand that when someone wears a suit, that it is a joke and they're not actually trying to be a salesperson. I'm glad he was able to pull it off, and I wish I was there to see how he presented himself to make the kind of in-joke more obvious.
Yeah, I've seen a few other people do that, and they tend to have somewhat of a reputation in the community as being a goofball, and that's how it works. So people just know that they're joking.
That might have helped, yeah.
Yeah, so if people don't know who you are or don't know that it's a goofball thing, then you have to call it out tongue-in-cheek and make sure everybody knows that you're definitely not taking yourself too seriously. Yeah,
I wore a tux, actually. So that's even more confusing.
Somebody should have figured that out. Yeah,
because I think some people didn't know the difference between tux and a suit. I wasn't sure, but people were like, "Oh, it's coming across very salesy because of the suit." But it was a tux, and no one got it.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, one last thing: if people want to find you online, where are you?
Justin B. Meyer at Twitter and GitHub, and then Bitovi.com for my blog.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming and talking to us. It's always interesting to see what else is out there. So,
yeah, it was great. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, that's our show. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.